Welcome to this video about how air traffic controllers might be able to diagnose possible pilot hypoxia. For the record, I'm filming this on February 8th of 2021. In the first of this three-part video series, I talked about some of the technical background. This video is about how controllers might be able to diagnose hypoxia, and then the third video is about how we might respond when we suspect a case of pilot hypoxia. Let's talk about the second and third videos for just a second. If you don't get the diagnosis done, which is this video, then we're never going to think about doing the response. Likewise, if we don't understand how to properly respond, then all the diagnosis in the world doesn't do any good. So both of these videos are particularly important. Let's get started, as we often do, with a look at the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge. What I'm going to do is kind of start somewhat theoretical, and then we're going to go more and more into some actual examples of this and talk about some very specific things that controllers can look for. We are not going to catch everything. Some of these are going to slip through our fingers. If we're trying to catch it, we're going to have a few false alarms, and that's going to be slightly socially awkward, and that's just going to be the way it is. Having said that, let's start with the theory. So the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, we're going to the last chapter in the book, chapter 17, Aeromedical Factors, and read just a little bit about hypoxia and then the symptoms of hypoxia. So we're going to start on page 17-3. Now, I've usually got it set up with 2 pages at a time, but for this video, it works better to just do 1 page at a time. So you probably understand what hypoxia is in the first place. I'm not going to belabor the point. Basically, it's a lack of oxygen at altitude, and it's going to affect pilots in certain ways. You're, of course, welcome to read up on that a bit more, and there's other training available about that. When it comes to symptoms of hypoxia, I want to look at this with an emphasis on thinking through what controllers might be able to detect. So that's one reason why I don't have all of the bullet items in this list highlighted. I'm also going to add one that is not on the list that I think is particularly relevant for air traffic controllers. So here we go. Symptoms of hypoxia. High altitude flying can place a pilot in danger of becoming hypoxic. Oxygen starvation causes the brain and other vital organs to become impaired. The first symptoms of hypoxia can include euphoria and a carefree feeling. Well, gee, that's going to make our job real easy, right? I mean, you know, pilots, if they're euphoric and having a good time, we can't just go around saying, oh, we suspect you're hypoxic and so on. But I just want to give that as a background, in part because there are documented cases of pilots saying they need lower, they're declaring an emergency, they need lower, and they actually seem to be, you know, sort of carefree, even though they're in the worst emergency of their life. That is a classic sign of hypoxia. With increased oxygen starvation, the extremities become less responsive and flying becomes less coordinated. That's true. I'm not sure how much controllers will see that because in order to go high enough to where you're hypoxic, most everybody these days is on autopilot and not really hand flying. And it's, of course, possible somebody's hand flying, but a lot of these pilots now are on autopilot, and so I don't know that we're going to see that very much with them kind of wandering around. The symptoms of hypoxia vary with the individual. Again, boy, you roll your eyes and go, gee, that's going to make our job real easy because everybody's different. All right, that's true, but we just got to deal with it. But common symptoms include, and I've only listed 3 here that I've highlighted, and as mentioned, I'm going to add one in a minute. So decreased response to stimuli and increased reaction time. We'll come back to that in a second. Impaired judgment and euphoria, I'll sort of pair that together. In my mind, those kind of go together in the way that controllers are going to see that. That's going to be somebody who says they need lower. It's kind of an unusual request. They're not just a jet trying to burn off a little bit of fuel to get down to their landing weight. This isn't somebody trying to get out of headwinds or turbulence. You know, sometimes as a controller, especially with experience, you just kind of pick up on when it's a slightly unusual request and so on, and yet they seem to be kind of, you know, doing okay. That's the kind of case where we have to be sort of on high alert about being possibly hypoxia. Let's go back to that decreased response to stimuli and increased reaction time. The increased reaction time, I think, is going to manifest itself in kind of that slurred and slowed speech with a lot of things, okay? There's a documented case of a pilot who said they wanted lower, and the controller's like, okay, what altitude would you like? I want... and I mean, and this guy's up in the high teens basically, and it's like, man, that's a classic sign of hypoxia. It's easier to see it after it's happened and the airplane has crashed than live, perhaps. But if you sense that this is something where the pilot's speech rate is kind of got that increased reaction time, again, kind of be on high alert. And now let's add the one on the that I want to add to this list that's not on here, and that is this. When pilots become hypoxic, one of the first things to go, and one of the things we just might be able to notice before they become too far gone that there's no meaningful treatment, is they can't handle more than about one number at a time. And so one of the suggestions I have, if we're not sure, and so we're thinking, okay, maybe they sound just a little too happy even though they say they want lower, and maybe their speech rate seems a little slow, I recommend throwing two numbers at them. I recommend a 10-degree turn. I don't care which direction. And if you can, descend them to some other altitude, just even if it's 1,000 feet lower than they are now, or, obviously don't put them into traffic or something. But try to give it kind of crisp and see and listen carefully to what the response is like. So if somebody says they want lower, okay, and you're not sure how low you can go or whatever, but in assuming we're not descending them right through traffic, do something like turn 10 degrees left, descend and maintain flight level 250. And if their readback is crisp, they're probably okay. If the readback is not crisp, or if they're going, okay, that was okay, what was that? Pilots that are operating airplanes high enough to be at hypoxic altitudes, they can handle two numbers. If we're throwing two numbers, like a 10-degree turn and some kind of descent altitude, and they can't handle the two numbers, that to me is a huge sign of possible hypoxia that controllers can pick up on. Then you need to think about what I'm going to cover in video 3 about possibly responding to suspected pilot hypoxia. Okay. Let's keep going. As hypoxia worsens, the field of vision begins to narrow and instrument interpretation can become difficult. That is related to the idea that you can't process more than about one number, and so pilots are going to have trouble interpreting their instruments and so on. And so in that case, another thing you can do, if you're not sure and you just need a diplomatic way of finding something out, ask them to say their airspeed. Okay? And again, if they're going, hang on. They should be able to answer the airspeed question right there. And by the way, if they're having trouble answering the airspeed question, you better get going right now in the treatment because they're just about done. But that's kind of the manifestation of that instrument interpretation. Therefore, putting those kinds of things together, as a controller, if we suspect possible hypoxia, I recommend throwing more than one number. So a couple of numbers at them, ask them, a simple question like that. If you want to, have them reset their transponder. Just have the computer generate a new code. So you get a new code on the airplane, it's, 4652, right? Squawk 4652. And throw those numbers at them faster than we usually do a little bit. And if they go, okay, 4652, then hey, they're good. If they go, that was 4 and say again, if you want to be diplomatic, those are the kinds of things you can throw at them. All right. Last thing here, even with all these symptoms, the effects of hypoxia can cause a pilot to have a false sense of security and be deceived into believing everything is normal. Again, like I said, that's going to make our job kind of hard. You can have cases where people need lower, but they say, I don't necessarily need it right away. You've got to look for these little subtle cues. There are a couple of other cues that you can pick up on. So let's switch gears here a little bit. I want to go to the website for the Southern Aeromedical Institute. I briefly mentioned this location, this place in the first video, and specifically this thing about slow onset hypoxia. This was, as far as I'm aware, something that was recognized by Dr. Paul Buza. And when I was first introduced to this is when I ran across a talk he gave at the FAA Safety Center at the Sun and Fun Air Show in 2014. I want to show you two snippets of that particular talk he gave at the FAA Safety Center. My apologies in advance. The audio and video quality is not that great. I don't believe there's anything I can do about it at this point. So let's watch two snippets of this. I'm going to start by jumping ahead to about the 5-minute mark. We're going to watch about 2.5 minutes. So we'll pick up right about here. And again, we're focusing on how controllers might be able to diagnose pilot hypoxia, even though that isn't per se what he's talking about directly.
In the standard fashion, and curious, the standard fashion is for all of us to jump in this chamber, in large groups. We all put our little masks on. We fly to 25,000 feet of altitude, low pressure. We come off the masks, and time of useful consciousness at 25,000 feet is approximately 3 to 5 minutes. So you start your exercises, you start doing simple tasks, and within 3 minutes, you can't do it anymore. You put your mask on, you recover nicely, and at that point, it teaches a very, very humble message that if you don't have much time if we lose cabin pressurization. You lose cabin pressurization, we don't have enough time. If you can't do a simple task, how on earth are you going to fly your aircraft? That's the standard in training. What I wanted to do in '06, after the Helios accident, was take the same chamber, but integrate flight sims, because pilots love to fly. And you give a pilot a sim, the first thing they want to do is take off, right? And I also built an air traffic control station immediately outside the chamber. And what we do is we fly in the chamber true altitude with the sim with air traffic communications. I'm going to show you some really interesting videos today of some of our, shall I say, more dramatic demonstrations of hypoxia. The good news is we can record the pilot's flight video. So here's the pilot flying. He knows his true altitude. He sees his performance, and we can actually see a global view of the chamber. We've flown over 2,000 pilots this way now since 2006. And as a matter of fact, we're way over 2,000. The program is growing. We're involved with commercial, university programs, cadet programs, corporate jet departments. So there's a whole broad spectrum of pilots that we've been training. And what they all love in the end, of course, is their video. It's a YouTube world. Everyone loves to watch themselves on video, right? So why don't we take advantage of that? And the pilots can watch themselves fly and at the same time watch their performance. So let's do some fundamental work. We can get through this pretty quick.
I am going to skip this part. This is that time of useful consciousness chart that's really applicable to something like a rapid decompression and so on. He's going to go through several examples of different people in the sim, and that's where I'm kind of picking up on some of these principles. But I do want to focus on one particular segment. Again, this is going to be about 3 minutes, so we're going to pick up at about the 20-minute and 14-second mark. Close enough. We're going to watch what happens.
Connect with 234 before you hit the ground. Switch to oxygen.
That's hypoxia. Hypoxia is human. It's a human experience. Signs and symptoms, yes, we're going to talk about it. But here he was euphoric. And look how happy he was, and he wasn't responding appropriately. That's hypoxia. And as we go through more, I'll show you some more videos. Now, you can be real happy and euphoric, or you could be real quiet and fixated. You don't want to talk to anybody. We take different forms of our personality into the hypoxia as we approach incapacitation.
Again, just roll your eyes. That's going to make our job real easy. Everybody's different, but let's keep going.
Here's another example. Let's watch this.
City via the PATIS 1 arrival on Victor 1524. Maintain your current altitude until 2306 Zulu.
103, can you repeat that?
So,
clear to the Salt Lake
Okay, he can't handle more than one number. That's the cue.
City, PATIS 1 arrival via Victor 1524. Maintain your current altitude until 2306 Zulu.
Continue to... can you 150 and can you report the rest of that, please?
DCA 103, you feeling any symptoms?
Yes, showing lightheaded.
Alright, if you had felt this way in the aircraft, what would you do?
I'd don my mask.
Alright, go ahead, DCA 103.
Alright, 103, donning the mask.
DCA 101, what's your current altitude, sir? Altitude's 16,000. Yeah, where are you going?
I'm heading 150, 101.
DCA 101, symptoms.
I'm getting a little dizzy, 101.
Alright, DCA 101, if you noticed your first officer just put on his mask, what would you do as the captain?
Are you talking to 101?
That's right, 101.
I would report 101.
Alright, DCA 101, go ahead and don your oxygen mask for me, sir.
101?
Yep, oxygen mask 101.
Alright, 101, mask.
Yes, sir. 102, how you feeling? Pretty loopy. DCA 102, can I get a right turn to heading 180, sir? Right turn to 180.
That's hypoxia. Did he not have normal speech? Does he not look like he's in control of the aircraft, yet his aircraft was out of control? Each person has a different way of manifesting their hypoxia. Sometimes it's very dramatic, there's lots of symptoms and sensations, they're very verbal about it. Other times they just don't really notice it much, right up to the point where they lose control of their aircraft. So hypoxia can sneak up on you.
And we're going to end here with this one. Of course, you're welcome to go to something like YouTube and just search for hypoxia chamber. Who knows what you'll come up with. A lot of these are pretty good. I've seen the Smarter Everyday one. This one's very good. There's one down here. This British pilot is an absolute riot, and so on. You can find a number of these and so on. But in a lot of these cases, the things that they have the people doing are playing games with like cards, like the Four of Spades or the children's toddler toy, something like that. Putting the shapes in and so on. And while that's useful to some extent, I really like the videos where people have posted their own videos from the Southern Aeromedical Institute altitude chamber. Okay, because what you see is them reacting in something like a simulated ATC environment. And for us, I think the single biggest takeaway is that they just can't handle numbers. All right, or they're giving wrong numbers. They're just in effect making stuff up in a number of those videos that I've seen. There's another thing though that's missing if you look at some of the videos that Dr. Bouza was showing, or that would come up in any of these videos, whether it's from the Southern Aeromedical Institute or from any other chamber, and that is there's the absence of alarms going off. In many hypoxia incidents, not all, in the real world, there will be alarms going off in the background. So if you hear any of these cues and there are alarms going off in the background, that is a huge red flag. All right, let's look at listen to some actual ATC audio of some incidents. So I want to start by going to the current version of the Indy Center In-Flight Emergencies project website. We're going to go to the page about interesting YouTube videos, and here we're going to go to the pressurization and hypoxia situation. We're going to start by listening to the audio when Coletta 66 first presented in 2008. For what it was worth, this was a 2009 Archie League Award winner. I want to listen to about the first minute and a half from this audio. This one has been out there. It's so entertaining, frankly, that you've probably heard it, but I want to listen for the specific kinds of cues that might help a controller diagnose this.
Coletta 66, Cleveland, out of here.
Coletta 66, 555.
Coletta 66, Roger, you're keying your mic and it's staying on there frequently, so please be careful.
Coletta 66, declaring an emergency.
Sir, he's declaring an emergency with his flight controls.
Affirmative.
Yes, sir, he said affirmative on that.
All right, Coletta 66, Roger, what are your intentions?
Request vectors Ypsilanti.
Sir, he's looking for vectors.
All right, Coletta 66, understand an emergency. You want a vector to Cincinnati, is that correct?
Negative. Vectors Ypsilanti.
Ypsilanti.
Coletta 66, are you able to maintain altitude? What assistance can I give you other than that vector?
Unable to control altitude. Unable to control airspeed. Unable to control heading. Coletta 66. And that's everything A-OK.
Okay, so, I mean, that's the classic line right there, right? Just can't control anything. Other than that, it's all okay. That's euphoria. But notice also the alarm going off in the background, the slow speech, that kind of heavy breathing. And the stuck mic thing, there's a lot of cases, and you can also see this with like the hypoxia chamber things you might find yourself on YouTube when people are playing with the toddler toy or something like that. You know, they go to put it in and they're just slow. The muscle coordination, they're losing it. For controllers, that can manifest itself as a stuck mic, not a permanently stuck mic, but just for a few extra seconds they're keyed up, because that's not what these pilots are going to do. Again, the pilots operating at hypoxic altitudes are going to have more experience, more training, and these are not student pilots. These are the kind of pilots who are going to get, you know, how to use a radio, and so to stay keyed up and breathe and over again, that's an absolute cue for us to listen to. Let's do another one. This time I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint, and we're going to go to the next slide here. In the spring of 2019 round of recurrent training, Module 3 was about emergencies, and I specifically asked for this audio clip to be included in the round of recurrent training when I had a role in getting this built and so on. And I want to listen to this audio clip. It's one of two. And I want to focus on the diagnosis. Listen for the stuck mic kind of stuff. Listen for the breathing. Listen for the slurred speech. Listen to see whether there's an alarm going off. Great job in the controller diagnosing this.
Hey, one Papa Mike, I'm maintain flight level 310.
310, 2 Papa, 1 Papa Mike.
And one Papa Mike, Fort Fort Wayne.
Fort Wayne, 2 Papa Wayne. 1 Papa Wayne.
Southwest 980, turn 15 degrees right.
15 right for Southwest 980.
Somebody at a stuck mic, check your mics. 501 Papa Mike, I'm going to maintain flight level 310. Somebody has a stuck mic, everybody check your mic. November 501 Papa Mike, radio check.
501 Papa Mike, go ahead.
And 501 Papa Mike, head of your Fort Worth Center.
Hey, good.
November 1 Papa Mike, do you need a descent clearance? November 501 Papa Mike, radio check, please.
Alright. Can hear you. Very, 501 Papa Mike.
And 501 Papa Mike, I think you need to start a descent. Can you do that?
I'm going to go ahead and end it there, and there are some silences that are edited out of that particular audio. Notice there was no alarm in this case. Why that alarm didn't go off, I don't know for sure. Okay, but you get that slurred speech, slow speech, extra keying of the mic, you know, stuck mic kind of stuff. That is a classic kind of cue that controllers might be able to pick up on. Let's look at one more in this kind of series, and I have it here again on the website, TBM 900 Kilo November. In this case, the pilot was flying along. I'm going to pause it for just a second, and we'll come back to the audio. I want to go to the NTSB report, just to give you a little bit of backstory. So in this case, the pilot and his wife were flying from New York State down to Florida. About an hour, 40 minutes into the flight, cruising at 280, they notified ATC of an abnormal indication of the airplane and requested a descent to flight level 180. Okay, again, that's you know, no emergency per se. That's not necessarily an abnormal request. That's slightly out of what's normal. Okay, but also, what are we talking about here with the TBM? This is a single pilot airplane in most cases. That's one case where controllers should really be on our guard. Let's kind of pause there for a second. Single pilot airplanes. The light jets, rule of thumb is many of the light jets are single pilot capable. They may or may not be operated with two pilots. Most of the turboprops that are not air carrier types, so the non-air carrier turboprops, you know, so King Airs, Turbo Commanders, you know, TBMs, PC-12s, those are almost always single pilot operated. Can be two pilots, especially for some of the, like the King Air 350s, let's say. But anyway, so here we have a single pilot type airplane wants a descent clearance. You'll hear the audio in a minute, and you'll hear the pilot say that there's really no emergency. But this, you know, with hindsight, we know is going to be hypoxia. So let's really kind of pay attention to the cues and so on. All right. And I will note the timing on this after we listen to the audio. So this audio, when you listen to it, I want you to listen for the cues, but the timing is slightly off here because silences have been edited out.
November 900 Kilo November, we need to descend down to about 180. We have an indication it's not correct in the plane.
Bye-bye. Or 0 Kilo November, descend to maintain level 250.
250, we need to get lower, 900 Kilo November.
Working on that. And have to get down, over 0 Kilo November, 10, 30 degrees left, have to get down.
30 left, 900 Kilo November.
Level 200.
Farmer dispatch is 1997.
200, 900 Kilo November.
Number 0 Kilo November, cleared direct to Taylor. Number 0 Kilo November, cleared direct Taylor.
Direct Taylor, 900 Kilo November.
Number 0 Kilo November, copy that, you got the descent level 200.
I'm going to stop it there. The controller's asking that because the pilot's not descending. Did you notice there were a couple occasions where the pilot just stayed keyed up for 2 or 3 extra seconds? Man, those are going to be so easy to miss. So I'm going to put it to you this way. Later if you have something like this and you miss that little subtle cue, that's utterly forgivable, okay? But if you've really brought your A game, that's going to be the little subtle cue. But going back to when he was initially cleared down to a 250 and he's like, okay, 250, but we need lower, that for controllers should be a big red alarm. Remember, one of the first signs is euphoria, and I've seen cases where pilots say they need lower, and then they say, well, no, it's not an emergency. That's kind of this weird hybrid situation where they know it's serious, but it's also kind of fine. All right, single pilot airplane up in those flight levels, that is a big red flag. Now, here's the irony of it. We're going to go, Roger, we're going to crank somebody else out of the way. We're going to crank this airplane out of the way. We're going to keep them descending, and then it's going to seem like everything's fine. They're never going to tell us they had any major problem, and you'll never know that you just saved a bunch of lives in some of these cases. In others, people are going to say, no, I just need to lower for the rides, and we're going to look like fools. That I don't have an easy solution to handle all that. Let's go back to the NTSB report just to look at a little bit of the timing of that audio, just so you get some sense. Okay, so he had checked in at 14:03:06 at 280, and at 14:04 and 17, 900 Kilo November, we need to descend down to 180. We have an indication that's not correct in the plane. So that's kind of when we're going to start our clock. In effect, it starts really a few seconds earlier as he first calls with his request and then makes the request and so on. All right, I get that Atlanta Center had traffic, and again, I want to be crystal clear here. The Atlanta Center controller did nothing wrong. We're talking about little subtle cues that we're trying to teach as we up our game and so on. But these are the little subtle things to look at. So I get, okay, that he's getting traffic stopped. I get that he's turning airplanes. That's wonderful. Again, this controller did nothing wrong. These are these little subtle cues to look for. Anyway, he clears him to 250. And so this is when that pilot reads back 250, but we need to get lower, 900 Kilo November. This is only 20 seconds or so after that initial request for lower, so this actually can happen pretty quick. The controller responds, working on that. There is traffic, and so he says, are you declaring an emergency? Not yet, but we'll let you know. Let's again, this is so easy to do with hindsight. It's so hard to do when it's live, but look at that. Not yet, but we'll let you know. We'll let you know. That wasn't a no. That's euphoria speaking right there. That's that disconnect. In hindsight, that's a yes. I know it's going to be easy to miss. I'm sorry that it sucks. That's the reality of it. And look at the timing. We're less than a minute after that initial request. When people become hypoxic at these altitudes, they go to sleep real fast, on the order of a couple minutes. We have a narrow window of opportunity in many of these cases. All right, it does not take long before he's trying to clear him down, and the transcript is not going to capture, okay, when the pilot stays keyed up a little bit extra. But this is where only about 2 minutes later that pilot is kind of talking. It's a little bit slow, and he stops talking, but he stays keyed up for 2 or 3 seconds. Dang, these are going to be hard. I get it. And each situation is going to be unique. But those are the kinds of things. All right. Let's switch gears a little bit more, because we could multiply examples, but I just want the takeaway to be, if you're not sure, throw a couple numbers at them and ask them a question about their speed, or give them a new transponder code or something like that. And if they don't answer crisply, or if you hear them just stay keyed up for a second, that's a big red flag. And anytime you hear an alarm, big red flag. 900 Kilo November, there was no alarm. But there's two other cases where I want controllers to really think about diagnosing pilot hypoxia. So this time we're going to really switch gears, and we're going to go to talk about something known as automatic emergency descent. I'm going to start with the Skybrary article about it. It just gives a quick definition. There are systems out there which automatically perform emergency descent to an altitude which does not necessitate supplementary oxygen when the crew does not respond to warnings concerning cabin altitude. This description is primarily concerned with turbine aircraft that are pressurized, and so when the cabin altitude rises because there's been a pressurization problem, the exact way that these systems work does vary from one aircraft type to another. But typically the way they work is once the cabin altitude gets above some certain threshold, it then basically alerts the pilot, okay? And if the pilot doesn't respond appropriately, then this kind of system can kick in. So generically, what it does is it monitors cabin pressure altitude, and if the cabin altitude exceeds whatever preset value that particular manufacturer has set, then the descent system may direct the autopilot to descend the airplane to some minimum safe altitude. It says it may communicate with ground facilities informing of the descent. My general understanding is we really cannot expect that, so that might be true, and we might get lucky if we get it, we get it. I don't think controllers should really expect that. And so the system may initiate the descent and so on, and it will warn the crew that it's about to do this and give a countdown, and if the crew does not interrupt the countdown, it says it will perform a sidestep maneuver, taking it to the right of the designated airway or whatever route it's on to avoid conflict. Controllers, be careful. That is not always true. Some of them will go to the right, some of them will stay on course, some of them will go to the left. Okay? And in most of these cases, we are not going to receive a notification. Let me go a little bit more in depth. Before I do, let me just pause for a second. For the most part, these systems are typically on jets. I will say that at least Garmin, I can't be sure if other manufacturers are doing this as well, but Garmin, for example, even on some of these other airplanes that are not pressurized. So let's take like Turbo Cirrus SR-22s as a kind of prime example that a lot of people are aware of, although there are other airplanes as well. They have a system that is similar but has different triggering or different triggers. This is not a cabin altitude based thing because like a Cirrus SR-22 Turbo is not a turbocharged airplane, so it doesn't make sense to hook this thing up to a cabin altitude warning. So basically in these cases, if the pilot does not interact with like knobs and buttons on the instrument panel every so often above certain altitudes, every once in a while it just asks the pilot something like how you doing, and if the pilot doesn't respond, then it starts its comparable countdown, and then eventually it too can start the descent. But I want to go a little further. There is an absolutely excellent article about this written by somebody, I have no idea who this is, Marty Rollinger in Professional Pilot Magazine. I'd love to really cite the whole article. I'm just going to briefly skim through it and so on. He talks about how this works, specifically in different kinds of airplanes. So for example, Dassault Falcon, and again, don't worry about memorizing the numbers and so on, but the takeaways, if you read through this in detail, is for the Dassault Falcon, it can operate the auto throttles if they were not already on even, and we bring the engines back to idle. It then starts the descent. So if you go to idle power and start the descent, a lot of these airplanes, can be descending on the order of, 2,000, 3,000 feet a minute or so. Okay. Also, though, remember Skybrary said these airplanes will turn to the right. Falcon, it turns left. There are others that turn left as well. So don't take it as gospel that it has to turn right. I will say that it uses half bank, so it's not going to be a really sharp turn. But think about how this would look to a controller. The flight crew is probably not going to be answering us because they're hypoxic. The airplane's going to start descending and suddenly start turning left. Well, gee, our adrenaline's not going to go up, right? Okay, but that is effectively a red flag that the Falcon system has kicked in and the flight crew is possibly hypoxic. In video 3, we'll talk about what controllers should be doing once we suspect that, but that's kind of the trigger. Gulfstream system works a little bit differently and unusual for many of these types of systems. The new Gulfstreams, the 500, 600, 700s, all go a step further and they open the air brakes. If the air brakes get open, the descent will be a lot quicker. Now, from a physiological standpoint, that's going to be a lot better. From an air traffic controller adrenaline standpoint, okay, it's going to be a little more dramatic when the airplane starts descending at 5,000 feet a minute. But again, so there are different systems out there. Textron systems can work a little bit differently. Embraer works a little bit differently. Here's a little take on Garmin, even in the non-pressurized cockpits and so on like that. But again, these systems, they all work differently. So with a few exceptions, generally speaking, these modes in these different manufacturing situations will not automatically deploy air brakes. They will not change the transponder code to 7700. They will not transmit Mayday on either the radio frequency or some kind of data link. Now, again, technology is changing all the time. This article was written, I don't know, a week ago. It might have changed already, right? All right. And just because you think that if you read the brochures that some of these are going to descend down to 15,000 or step down to whatever altitudes, a lot of these don't know about the altimeter settings, and since they're typically up in the flight levels, they'll probably be on 902. One of the things I like about this article is they actually took their airplane and on a deadhead leg arranged to do a test. So you're welcome to read through it and so on. One of the quick takeaways is that in order to set this, because this was a cabin altitude-based system in the Falcon, they actually had to essentially turn the oxygen system, or the pressurization system off, okay? And even then, because these things typically are so well sealed, it took a little while in order for the cabin altitude to raise up high enough for this system to trigger. When it triggered, and yes, the pilots were smart enough to wear oxygen masks, okay, and then they didn't respond to the cues, and so the countdown started. When it began, they were a little surprised. And so let me find it here real quick. It took even over 2 minutes for that cabin altitude to rise from 14,500 to 15,000 in that case. And it was much more benign than the emergency descent practiced in the simulator for a couple reasons. One, again, this is a Falcon. The air brakes do not automatically deploy, and thus the descent rate is similar to an everyday descent. Second, the turn is done gracefully at half Mach. Now, it did descend the airplane and so on, but the idea is that's one way this can present. So let's get this wrapped up, because my wife is saying that, we got dinner tonight here, and I got to wrap this up. Can't just sit in the basement and record these videos all day. You're probably saying the same thing. I don't want to play that. Sorry, Llewellyn. Okay. Llewellyn, I believe is her name. All right, summary. Each instance is going to be unique. Look for little things like slurred speech. Sometimes it can be a request for descent that's just a little bit unusual. Heavy breathing, non-responsiveness to clearances. They can't handle more than one numbers. They're going to, be the 2 seconds worth of stuck mic before they unkey, or they're going to key and not talk. Things like that. But one thing I want controllers to be particularly alert for is single pilot aircraft, but also aircraft climbing through the 20s. Let me explain what I mean by that. Go back to that slow onset hypoxia that Dr. Bouza talks about in connection with the slow onset hypoxia. If you go through what he's talking about, where you've had all these fatalities related to this. This is what happens if the pressurization system is essentially not set properly, and in some of these cases the alarm doesn't go off for some reason, or the pilots think they have it figured out, or in the Helios accident they actually thought it was a different alarm. Okay, they just misdiagnosed what the sound was relating to, and so on, and the euphoria kind of was a part of that. But where these typically manifest, in Helios, in Payne Stewart, in Coletta 66, which was a slow onset hypoxia, what was the other one I was thinking of just a second ago? The Avanti, okay, with Fort Worth Center situation. 601 Papa Mike, I think, was the tail number. In all of those are airplanes climbing through the 20s. Now, a couple of those, the Helios certainly was a two-pilot situation. Payne Stewart Learjet was a two-pilot situation, so these are not just two-pilot situations. But that slow onset hypoxia typically sets in as they're climbing through about the 20s. Therefore, controllers, while depressurization and things like that can happen up at altitude, where a lot of these cases are really sinister is when airplanes are climbing through the 20s. Therefore, controllers, if you have somebody climbing, they're above 18, they're below 30, let's say, to me that's the 20s, right? Okay, and you're seeing those little subtle cues, throw them a couple numbers, ask them to change their transponder code, ask them their airspeed. If you have problems getting a straight answer, I argue you have less than a minute, maybe 2 minutes tops, to get started on the treatment of this, or they're likely dead. This is tough. We're going to miss some. We're also going to have some false alarms. I'd like to see this improved, but for now, maybe this is the best we can do. Thank you.